All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We're really excited to be here with all of you tonight to discuss the coercive power of law, vulnerable bodies, and boundaries of perception. We're here with one of the authors, Riley Clare Valentine, and they're in conversation with Allison Raine Chapman. I'll introduce Riley. Riley is a political theorist who received their PhD from Louisiana State University. Their work and also their degree from Agnes Scott College, it must be said, since we are affiliated with Agnes Scott. Their work focuses on care ethics as a political ethic and disability studies critiques of legal embodiment. Their books include Progressive Liberalism and Neoliberalism in American Politics, which came out in 2024, and Be Gay, Do Crime from PM Press in 2025, which is a Charis bestseller. Valentine's work can be found in journals such as Disability and Society, as well as Medicine, Healthcare, and Philosophy. They're joined tonight by Allison Raine Chapman, who is a transgender rights activist, technologist, and legal scholar. She obtained a BSc in digital forensics and cybersecurity from Eastern Kentucky University. Since 2022, Allison Chapman has been tracking and analyzing anti-LGBTQ plus bills and policies across the United States. Her work as an activist and legislative researcher has been featured in major news publications, including Reuters, Washington Post, Wired, Nonprofit Quarterly, Truth Out, and NPR. So with all that is happening in the world, we're really, really, really glad that y'all are here to have this wonderful discussion with us. I want to encourage all of our folks who are watching to ask questions at any time. So Allison might pull in your questions as she's kind of asking her own questions. So don't be shy. Y'all are obviously already not shy in the chat, which is great. Feel free to continue to talk and share your thoughts in the chat, but also feel free to put your questions in early and often. We may not get to all of them, but it's great to just have y'all in the mix. So I'm going to get out of the way and let these two smart people get talking. Welcome to you both. Thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I'm
thank you.
so excited to be here with Riley. So Riley and I talk fairly often. We're friends, but we don't talk about the topics that are discussed in this book. We mostly talk about like random video games or D&D or just other random topics and just, normal life stuff. So I'm really excited to get to have this conversation. I won't forget, I was in a group chat with both Riley and Riley's co-author Zane, and each one of us went to our door like within the same 10 minutes and realized the book had come at our house. And so like over the course of 30 minutes, everyone just took photos of their book coming. So I have gotten a chance to I haven't finished it yet, but I've gotten a chance to start through it. Hey, you've got it right there too. To really start to dig into it, and it is fantastic. So, Riley, thanks for hanging out with me today.
Thank you so much, Ali, and also thank you to Charis. As already mentioned, I went to Agnes Scott, and I lived in Atlanta for 5 years. And Atlanta was coming from a small town in Georgia, and my family's from small towns in Louisiana. Atlanta was a moment where I was really exposed to a lot of activism. It's where I got involved in Occupy Atlanta and started to become friends with folks at the Teardown and oh Lord, it used to be, I think, the Open Door House, which was like a Protestant Catholic social worker house and programs for teaching English to newly arrived refugees in Clarkston. And so it was a foundational place for me and getting to meet so many amazing people, especially through Agnes Scott.
Yeah, that's amazing. And as I was talking in the green room, I grew up in upstate South Carolina in the Greenville-Spartanburg area. So I didn't make my way down to Georgia very much, but I have been there a couple times. And yeah, I'm fascinated to see if how much my Southern accent starts to show a little bit. I've not lived in the South for too long, or for a while now. But whenever I am around people like Riley, who does still have a wonderful accent, there's times where it starts becoming more apparent. But yeah, so Riley, I don't know if I've actually even. Hey, there's someone else from Greenville. Woohoo! Um, so I don't know if I've actually asked you like where you all got the idea for this book and where like what was kind of the inspiration behind it.
Yeah, so Zane and I have written a lot together, and we've done work on looking at how like conservatives in the United States had been partnering with Erdogan and other right-wing extremist groups, and we looked at how like the United States doesn't really have extreme protections of freedom of speech. And we started looking at projects around how the law is always used as a way, an idea of liberation, but that often fails and it doesn't actually result in any significant change because rights exist if they're recognized. And as we are increasingly seeing, rights in the law are not being recognized and in fact are being, right now we're in January 2026, so uh perhaps better days are in sight. We can hope and pray, Lord of mercy. However, like when we were working on this, it was right as Dobbs overturned Roe v. Wade and Clarence Thomas started to say like, well, any case that's associated with the same legal argumentation, except Loving v. Virginia, all of those will be up to sort of like reevaluation. And we have been following that. We'd written a paper about that, and it's kind of realizing that like a paper's not enough. And so we wanted to look into it through like some case studies, so disability, book bans, because I'm a teacher, and seeing books being removed from libraries is terrifying, and gender affirming care limits on that, and as well as abortion bans.
Yeah, and like that time period right around the time that you know, Dobbs' decision came out was really when we started seeing this increase too in that legislation targeting and queer books, especially, and gender affirming healthcare, and all of that kind of all took off right around the same time. And then your this book coming out right after US, right around or right after US v. Scrimetti was decided as well. I don't know, it continually is very applicable to where we currently are in the legal world as far as um, queer and other, vulnerable groups' rights and their rights to exist almost in a lot of ways.
Yeah, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is, we write about how like the New York Times, Clarence Thomas references the New York Times, who has been having these like anti-trans screeds, and we've seen them continue to publish, for various groups of individuals, hateful, hateful pieces with very little research, and we're seeing Marjorie Taylor Greene go on, do her circuits and trying to sort of rehab her image, as people are saying at the New York Times that the Democrats, are too left, which they're not. They're very conservative. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is oddly enough being heralded as separating from Trump, has never apologized for anything she's done, for any of the anti-Semitic things she's done, racist things she's done, anti-immigrant things she's done, and she, in fact, I haven't checked its progress in the Senate. I think you would know more than me about that, but she helped like author the harshest bill around gender affirming care for minors, where it makes it a Class C felony. So that's like 10 years in prison and fees, which can vary state to state. And it's not just like doctors, it's also family members who help their child. So it's expanded the harm and the reach. And this is one of the last things she's doing while she's in office, is this violent, horrible thing. And at the same time, we had Gorsuch say that trans people are a protected minority. So while we're having these sort of legal arguments that, oh, trans people are protected, you're having all of these rights fundamentally, these fundamental rights, according to the Supreme Court, simultaneously being stripped apart by our legal system, by our legislative system, and the judiciary branch, and all at the same time. And so with this book, it exists because we were just furious at the fact that leftists and minorities and marginalized groups are continually told that there's like good ways to fight for your rights, there's good ways to do things, but we see them fail over and over again, and we see the law acting in ways that are punitive. And it doesn't mean that the law is useless, but it means it's insufficient. And if you only rely on the law, then we won't have liberation.
Yeah, I think I really love that. That's as someone who is currently actively pursuing law school, I feel really fortunate to have this book and people like you and Zane around me who we can have these conversations around, you know, a field of study that like requires a lot of dedication and a lot of work to get into, and it and is also very discriminatory just to be able to have the privilege of being able to get into a law school. That's a whole other discussion, though. But it's really a I forgot where I was going with this, but it's yeah, is this really oh, I remember now. I'm really fortunate to have that kind of framework and that viewpoint of realizing that the work that I'm doing and I'm trying to get into to do isn't necessarily going to bring liberation. At best, it's going to be harm reduction, and it's going to be, I believe there's a lot of good that can be done still in that field, and being able to even help one person to be able to make one thing a little bit better is something. And like, I also think, again, we're in January 2026. I'm kind of clinging for any little bits of uh, of hope and visions of a better future right now. But yeah, and so I kind of want to get into a little bit. You talk about in the book about visibility of folks and how that interplays with um, the law, and both on protections and then also on the flip side, also like this, like the framing of folks of being a threat at the same time a little bit. But I want to focus a little bit on the visibility side to start with, which is um, like, how has visibility politics, as we have seen in specifically queer spaces for the past 15 or 20 years, really contributed to where we are now in the world, as in, trans people are considered to be in a fairly risky, or there's some level of risk of just being a trans person in the United States at all. So how has visibility and the politics of, we need to be visible and accepted, and be out and proud, which I'm not saying that those things are bad, right? I'm wearing my pride pin that I wear on my jacket, but how does that really kind of contributed to this current climate?
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a really good point at the end of that is throughout the entire book, we try to straddle this line of being like, these things aren't necessarily bad in and of themselves. Like, I'm trans, I'm disabled, I'm an educator, and that matters for a lot of my students who may have never met an adult, and so they may not know that it's possible to live that life. So it's not saying that those things are useless, but I can't remember who, but Zane had this amazing quote that he found, which said that like visibility is a trap. So the law, there's this theory called material anonymity, which is that certain bodies are invisible. in the law, and difference is legislated into it. So historically, with like liberalism, right, which is the theory, is we see that the bodies that are invisible are largely cisgender, heterosexual, male, socioeconomically comfortable, abled, all of these things. And so then bodies that don't fit that are then legislated about, and the legislation says something about those bodies and the people who live in those bodies. So one of the things that we looked at, especially in looking at a lot of the backlash with book bans, was looking at attacks on drag queens and drag performances existing. And what we found consistently in the law was that drag was defined alongside. It was funny to see people say go-go dancers, which I hadn't heard except from like Lord, like my mama, talking about the 70s. So that was interesting. But go-go dancers and other performers that do more sexual performers. So then when they say drag artists and drag performers are inherently sexual, it's because in the law, that's what they've been connected to. Drag has been established as a sexual performance, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad or that that isn't true, but it does mean so that when drag queens are doing drag story hour at public schools or public spaces like libraries, that then it is perfectly viable, according to the law, to say that people who do drag are like overtly sexual and are harming children. And so visibility is simultaneously very important. However, we can't just embrace it wholeheartedly. Like there has to be a critical element and analysis of what that means, And when we look at it across all of the identities that we looked at, we consistently see that some forms of sexuality are being legislated as being good, and other forms of sexuality are legislated as bad and deviant and sometimes like disgusting, right? And a form of sexuality and existence that should be hidden away and that you should feel shame. And we also see that with disability and with supports for disability requiring you to talk about how awful your life is as a disabled person, how dependent you are, how tragic your life is. And that's to receive aid. Like that's what I had to do to get on disability, which I needed and it kept me alive. But in order to qualify for that, I had to talk about how horrific my life was. But there's also these initiatives with disability pride saying you should be proud of your identity, you shouldn't feel shame. And we see this rippling effect. And throughout all of these things, oh, thank you, Lee. Yes, Foucault. God bless Foucault. So we see that across all of these identities and all of these experiences that people are consistently made visible, and yet that visibility is frequently incredibly harmful. It's not neutral.
Yeah, and I mean, I want to kind of add a little bit of something to that. When you look at these laws or the proposed bills, even where they are inserting a lot of this language, it's really telling on um the the intent behind it and the way that they view um certain people. And it is very much like clumped in with things of like obscenity laws and stuff like that, where it is there and regulates um all kinds of things. It's pretty expansive, but um it is really wild how um sorry, my brain keeps going and breaking. It's been a long day. I have not got enough sleep lately. um but um I'm going to start writing notes throughout this. So if you see me looking down, it's because I'm writing so I don't forget things. But we were looking at, or you said earlier something that I'm trying to remember now around, what was it? I don't remember now. So we're just going to move on from this because I am completely, my brain is completely fried for the moment. Um, so I remember what it is now. Sorry, y'all, that took me a minute. But when you were talking about the having to be prideful, like you want to be not have to hide who you are, but also you need to portray it as being horrible, and that that you need like saving. It's almost like this kind of like superhero, like, and like kind of in like even like white saviorism, where you, when you're even trying to get legislation passed that to help reduce the harm on uh you or your community, you're really having to go and be like, well, this is all of how horrible my life is right now, and this is something that um, I found when I can't remember who on Twitter said this. This is something I read on Twitter though when I came out that really resonated with me on transness, and I think it also can apply to many other things. Is being trans, you have to be not only a person, you also have to be an expert in your own healthcare. You have to be an expert in law. You have to be an expert in all of these other fields just to live your everyday life, to just ensure that you have access to what you need to live, whether it's healthcare or um, legal protections, or opposing what we're seeing right now, which is the opposite of protections, these really harmful attacks that are to a level of dehumanization, really. um and yeah, that's kind of where like my mind went with this, is really around that. And I really loved that um Twitter post that I read, because it was always like that was very early on and kind of really like very became a like a core part of my view on what it is to be a trans person, and what um you're really having to do to in order to exist.
Yeah, I remember getting some of my legal documentation changed and how much I relied on other trans people and legal assistance from people who had done it, particularly in Louisiana, because state by state and even parish by parish, everything is different. I remember I decided not to change a lot of my paperwork in Georgia because even uh, the law, again, it's 2026, so maybe it changed. I wouldn't be surprised if it hasn't. But even for a name change, you had to like publicly post something in the newspaper, and if someone wanted to contest it, they could, and that was very frightening for me. And somehow Baton Rouge, Louisiana, was did not require it. Now it was incredibly expensive, and there were a lot of hoops to jump through. However, if I didn't have such a strong community, then I I don't know that that would have been possible. In the same way that, without my disability community, I don't know that a lot of things that I've had access to would be possible. And we talk a lot, or like, because so I'm a political theorist and I'm also a care ethicist. And throughout it, we talk about how the law may not save us, but our communities can. And I have found that, you know, being trans, being disabled, so many times that I have been dependent on other people, it's and have needed people, the aid that I've gotten, the most substantive aid, has been from my community and sometimes even strangers. For a very long time, I my epilepsy was not controlled, and I would have seizures just in public, like small absence seizures, like multiple. So I would be almost fairly like unconscious while moving and doing things, and that was the people who would help me. Oftentimes were strangers, and I would come to, and there'd be someone I didn't know helping me. And, I couldn't afford medical care, but having just a person who was passing by helped me. made me feel like I was not alone, even though I felt very alone legally and from the healthcare, and I felt abandoned in many ways. And in the process of getting paperwork changed and pursuing healthcare as a trans person, I also felt abandoned by our government. Even though I live in a blue state now, it's incredibly hard to receive any care as a trans person. And so I've had to consistently turn to other trans people because the state is not there for me, but my community is.
Yeah, and I think, what you're saying about all the hoops you have to jump through in order to, um, you know, better yourself and whatnot is really when you're talking about like the coercive power of the law, right? And that all of this that the law requires you to do in order to live a similar life as a uh, normative person. And I'm going to pull it up in the book because I have this marked, and I really, really, really liked the definition that you all put in here for what a normative body is. So I want to read it real quick because I think it is excellent. Um, it goes, the Western liberal tradition asserts that normative body asserts the normative body as white, cisgender, heterosexual, masculine, and able-bodied, among other significant identities. And I really like the conciseness of that definition of like it really and how that is the norm and assumed to be the norm in the way that our law is written, especially considering that so much of it has been written over the course of or not thousands, hundreds of years. And yeah, and so like, can you talk a little bit about like specifically the term like coercive power of the law any more than what I just kind of reiterated and what you already said?
Yeah, so I adopt it's called like the strong expressivist perspective of the law, which is that the law expresses, hence the term, the perspective of the state. And the law is inherently coercive in that even if it's most beneficial, it acts as a way to like move you into a way that somehow can like fit alongside the normative body. And even so, research consistently shows that that doesn't end biases. That doesn't end someone's gonna still be homophobic even though gay marriage exists. That was one of the most extensive studies was on how like assimilation is ineffective. And so this idea that the law inherently and these structures are inherently coercive and that in order to live within them you have to follow their strictures, their guidelines. So you can't just be a trans person who wants to live and wants to be fine. You have to follow these laws and follow certain procedures, and if you don't, you will be penalized.
Yeah, and it's really like this labeling of I know you also use the word deviance of like you're considered deviant, especially unless you jump through these hoops, you're considered to um, be kind of outside of the system in a ways and what the system expects from you. And I think this really can also apply to um, transmedicalism and really
Yes.
the view of that if you're trans, you have to have XYZ symptoms and you have to medically transition, and you have to have all the surgeries and you have to have all of this. And if you don't, you're not as much of a trans person as I am, which is a really problematic thing. And one of my, you know, one of the views that is often stated in the trans community is around that being trans isn't a choice and transitioning isn't a choice, when I prefer to look at it as being like through more of a lens of bodily autonomy and being like, well, why can't it be a choice? Like, why not? Like, if you wake up tomorrow and say, yes, I want to have estrogen, okay, great. Well, that sounds good. Like, you should have the autonomy to do that.
Yeah,
And then
absolutely.
the one other thing I wanted to say was your definition of, laws, and that they are there as kind of pushing the expectations and the viewpoint of the state reminded me so much of, if you watch Dimension 20, Brennan Lee Mulligan has one of my favorite quotes, which is, laws or threats made by the dominant socioeconomic ethnic group in a given nation is just the promise of violence that's enacted, and the police are basically an occupying army. And I think that is kind of ties together like what we're currently seeing in Minneapolis, over the past several weeks after the murder of Renee Good by ICE. And yeah, and it all kind of ties in together. I think you were saying that at the very beginning of the talk, is like it's kind of all related and is all like a part of um the legal world and this system that we have built and we're now cursed with, it feels.
Yeah, like ICE exists to pursue like civil issues. So it's like if the EPA showed up highly militarized. I mean, not that they can anymore after West Virginia. However, it's patently absurd. Besides the fact that it's racist, it's remarkably unconstitutional, seeing as how all people have due process, not just citizens, not just people who are DACA. All people have due process before the law of the United States. However, this blatant, blatant violation of the Constitution is being seen as something that should be protected. And it follows off of decades of legislation. I mean, I remember being in Georgia after DACA was passed and the government saying that undocumented people could not get funds to go to specific universities such as Tech, GSU, and other universities. And so people started Freedom University in response to that. And so this chipping away at the humanity of people, it's not surprising to me that ICE is a murderous group of individuals who are disappearing people. That's not surprising at all. What is surprising to me is to see so many people being shocked that this could happen when the groundwork has been laid for a significant amount of time, and increasingly dehumanizing rhetoric against undocumented peoples has been widely accepted in our media and hasn't been particularly challenged in any strong way. There may be a few people, and insofar as like our politicians, there may be a few who have said things, but largely they're still being considered like a quote unquote problem. And so it's the ways in which the law is not only being instrumentalized as a force of almost, reinstituting the entire basis of American policing system came out of slave catching. So it's not surprising either that we would see this kind of replication of racial violence by the state. And so yeah, it's seeing this in 2026 and this book coming out like right before all like the further mobilization of ICE, the disappearing of people by our government is makes it really prescient in a way that's not that feels bad. Uh, you don't want like as a political theorist who does a lot of ethical critiques, I don't want my ethical critiques to become salient. It would be much nicer if they were theoretical. But instead we are seeing this play out in horrific ways, in horrific physically violent, like psychically violent, emotionally violent. It's horrifying.
Yeah, I would love to get into a little bit too about how state surveillance comes into play along with visibility, both around queerness, but also around any of the other topics we've been talking about, like how does those things play together as far as like being coercive and also enforcing these systems?
I think, like, funnily enough, sit with your work in like cybersecurity, you probably would be the best person for that question.
So I love that you just went and turned around my question on me. I'm sorry. This conversation topics that I created here was created to ask you, not me. No, I'm happy to talk about how surveillance plays into this. Um, it's I'm really seeing it a lot right now, especially in the as the terrorizing of Minneapolis has played out. I'm seeing this not only in myself, but others and other people who are on the ground and organizing all over the country of this when you assume and have to assume that you're under a level of surveillance or additional scrutiny for any reason, um, you it disrupts your life in many ways, and it it changes everything. It changes the little things, like I'm not going to throw this piece of mail with personal information away. I'm going to shred it first. Oh, I should be cognizant of if I'm going to go um, see someone who is more vulnerable than me, that I should be cognizant of making sure I'm not bringing increased risk to them, because there's a chance that they could be connected to me and I am seen as this deviant radical despite following all of the laws and all of the things they're claiming to be deviant and radical isn't even necessarily even it doesn't even reach the point to the system that we've been talking about that is problematic. Like it doesn't even reach the level of regulation that we already experience. It's like a whole new level of expectations coming in from almost an executive level. Well, it is coming in from like an executive level and a authoritarianism a lens. But there's very much this like feeling of when I've seen some things, and this is something I'm really actively trying to understand more of how this affects you, and not only adds to stress and has negative and mental health outcomes, but also is this it changes everything, and you don't get to, because of it, you don't have the opportunity to live the same life that one that meets the definition of the normative body.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, thinking about how research in public health shows that when people have strong social connections, their health outcomes are better. And so this is like you're talking about, like, all of the different ways it impacts you. This directly impacts people's health and physical well-being. The material effects of this aren't just that, now I'm revisiting security culture things that learned in early organizing, and now they're having to be updated as well, just because technology is updated and there is more surveillance. So that becomes trickier, and people are so used to like participating in surveillance with filming that it now makes
Oh,
things.
and then we could get into surveillance capitalism and stuff like that, of how everyone is willingly and checking boxes to agree to give all of their personal information up, because we have built a capitalistic hellscape that is has built technology around that we are almost required to use in order to have a normal life and even contribute to society in a lot of ways. Um, and the only way to do that is by accepting these terms. So again, we're going back to kind of the coercive power here, right? Where you're not, while you are consenting in ways to have them take this data, you don't really have an option. If you want to be on Facebook to connect with your friends and go on, one of my big things is I like finding good deals on Facebook Marketplace, right? It's great. There's Craigslist doesn't really exist anymore. There's not an alternative. There you have to use Facebook, and like it's this, and we could talk about it in the ways of monopolies. Like again, this is when we start branching out. It's like it's all connected. But yeah, it's just the surveillance, the capitalism and surveillance is just so closely intertwined, and people are, and as technologies increased and as we're seeing more and more adoption of AI, and what its abilities are for whether it's not always accurate, and it has all of its other issues too, but is also a very dangerous tool to use in the world of surveillance. And this is something that is going to become increasingly of an issue. And I'm really concerned that this is an area that we're scratching the surface on, in the United States specifically, in a way that we haven't realized, in a way that people don't realize the level of surveillance that you're under on a given day.
Yeah, like even LinkedIn, which I use professionally and I've used to connect with people with my research. They now use data scraping, hellhole bots. And I remember in a previous work Zane and I did, people were on Twitter using Grok to try to find out like where we lived. And it is not difficult to necessarily find those things. Even if you pay for services like Delete Me and things like that, like those are still easily able to get around. However, it's not necessarily feasible. And for many people, and I think there's a level of thinking that almost there's a requirement to understand how LLMs work, to understand how data scraping works, that is very limiting for a lot of people, because not everyone understands those things and understands what is actually happening with their data and the danger that it provides. And so I get very worried about my online presence, and I get worried about the fact that I speak publicly, like in events like this, which is wonderful. But even so, there are people who really try to use these moments to figure out where people are and what's happening, and it's dangerous and scary.
Yeah, and I got my start in the trans Twitter online activism kind of space. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. And I have gotten my fair share of hate and my fair share of unsubstantiated death threats and all kinds of wonderful things that, and this is, again, this kind of connects a little bit to what we were talking about earlier of just having to talk about harms, and then people almost like being like shocked, is being like, oh yeah, I've got death threats before, like it's nothing, like this is normal life for me and my friends and the people I work with in these spaces. It's like, oh yeah, I have someone stalking me and harassing me. Yeah, that's just normal every day. Like that doesn't faze me. Like that is over every day here. Okay, I want to steer us a little bit to now. We've talked about some of the harms that we're seeing and the level of state violence that we're all witnessing. And, this has been something we've been witnessing for many, many years. And social media has been a big part of that, especially as the genocide in Palestine has happened. I think there is like the amount of violence that everyone has witnessed via social media and videos, and seeing horrors beyond imagination um, is really overwhelming in a lot of ways. So, you being a care ethicist, how does one kind of start practicing that now in a world that is um, incredibly violent, and especially with state violence?
We live in a very uncaring world. The thing that I really like about care ethics is that it comes with actual things that you can assess a society with. But care ethics is built to be, it originally started with like interpersonal ethics, and has since, like, my work kind of looks at it as a political ethic, but it still applies interpersonally. And the idea is there's a few conditions which I really love, that there are distinct conditions that you can look at to see if like things are materially being met. So this refers to like your community and others as well as the state, is the attentiveness. Are needs being seen? Are they being just understood that they exist? Are they recognized? Are they overlooked? In which case, that's an uncaring society. Is Are people taking a responsibility and action to assist in meeting those needs? And is it being done so in a way that is compassionate? So if you provide care, but in a way that, or something that someone might think is care, but in a way that is really harmful to the other person. So, we've talked about how, trying to get aid and trying to get things that affirm yourself or maybe you need physically can be really degradatory. I don't think that's a word. Why
I
not?
know what you're trying to say. I'm not sure. I am very much the wrong person to ask.
Well, I guess with academia, you can just make up words, and if you use it long enough, it becomes real. So we'll go with it. So degradatory, deleterious. There we go. It can be deleterious to your well-being, and so it is, in fact, uncaring. So you have to assess those things all together, and sorry, without it, it becomes really difficult to understand where to go from that. And I like care ethics because it gives us a foundation. So it allows us to be, and it requires us to be reflective, to think about, are we also recognizing needs? Are we taking the time to act on assisting people with those needs? And it's the idea that we have obligations that extend beyond ourselves. And those obligations also extend to beyond not just people as well, but also the environment. So we are all interconnected, and I am responsible not just for you, my friend, but for people who I will never meet. And those obligations have ripple effects. They exist before us and after us, and we have a responsibility to fulfill those obligations. And I find personally great comfort in this philosophy that we are all working together to sort of fight this existential this existential dread, almost, or maybe I extended it as existential dread, but we are all working together in order to combat these forces. And maybe, it'll be people I will never meet. And I find that very comforting, that people I don't know, people I will never meet, are also participating in care and are also hoping and thinking of how to build a better world. And the way that we can do that is through care, and is through caring for one another, and is through advocating for societies that are caring. Because something that is really powerful, and is a really powerful tool of fascism and authoritarianism, is to make us feel as though we can't do anything. And we can't. However, again, fascism also stresses the importance of the individual hero. And part of it is in a very unremarkable everyday actions in which we care for one another. And so it's in our everyday, very boring lives that we can provide distinct care for one another. And that, to me at least, is liberatory.
That's really beautiful. And I've really enjoyed. I love hearing you talk about care ethics, and it's one of the reasons why I really enjoyed a lot of the book. Is understanding it, because it really does make sense and resonate with me in a lot of ways. And the book was a really good introduction to kind of that. If you do get the book, like it took me, I think, like 2 hours. I'm a slow reader, but like 2 hours of like I have my book filled with highlights and notes, and I intentionally tried to really kind of connect and understand it a little bit. And I think it's really, for me, it was less about necessarily I found it comforting because it kind of explained to me why some of the experiences I've had and I've witnessed in the world are the way they are. And I found a lot of comfort in that, from understanding, being like, oh, there's a reason. It's not, and it's almost like this internalized this internalized transphobia or homophobia or what have you, that kind of seeps in after a while, and you're like, I don't know, maybe it is me, maybe it, stuff like that. And so this was like a very like, oh, there's a reason behind all of this, and we're like, I found great comfort in that. Okay, I think we've got a few more minutes left, and I have a little exercise that I want all of us to do, and I'm really excited about this. So I want everyone who is on the call, if you're driving, please don't do this. Everyone, close their eyes for a moment, and I want everyone to imagine what a future society, what your dream society, your dream world could look like, and really start to explore that a little bit and try to imagine what that could look like. And for me, like I start imagining, just imagine like a spring day to start with, but as a community, or I imagine it being a community of people who take care of each other's needs and put everyone ahead of themselves in some way, and really comes together to ensure everyone is taken care of, that queer people are accepted, that there is a general world of bodily autonomy where you have full rights and control over your own body. These are the kind of things that I'm thinking of. Riley, what are you thinking of when you think about like what is your ideal dream society?
That's such a really lovely question. I also think of societies and communities in which we care for one another, and there's this theory of like responsibility, and not the neoliberal type of responsibility where it's individual, but this idea of almost a future oriented collective responsibility, and thinking about our actions not just in the scope of you and me, but in the future. So we have an obligation to care for, the earth now, for example, so that future generations can also live and enjoy this planet and have and in a way that is fulfilling. So I think of a world in which we are able to access human capabilities. We're able to be our most human, and that relies upon one another, and as you said, like being in communities.
Yeah, and like I really imagine a way of more of a, I think one of the, something that, as someone who has hopped careers many times, but very much of a, and sometimes a requirement for just money and to be able to afford to live or stuff like that is, I really imagine a place where people get to do what they feel drawn towards and contribute in the ways that they feel most capable to, most excited about, most interested in. Um, and I think, yeah, I can imagine something beautiful. I wanted to kind of talk about this a little bit, just as a like, I think is really important to ground ourselves in when we're talking about, you know, the horrors of state violence and everything that we continually witness. And um, imagine that it might not always be that way, and that if we work together, we maybe can build a world where that's possible. How do you, this is going to be a loaded question. I'm so sorry. Um, how do you see as a pathway to go from where we are now to that? Do you see a very clear pathway, or do you think it's something that could be many different ways? Like, kind of like, I know this is a really broad question, but I kind of want to ask it, and I'm really curious what your thoughts are.
I don't I don't think there's any one way. I do think a core principle is a positive curiosity towards difference. So curiosity isn't value neutral, and there's certainly a very harmful form of curiosity, and we see that right now, especially with like what the state is doing um, to people, being very medically invasive, especially with trans people and with abortion access and all of these things. So a curiosity that is positively interested in difference and doesn't view others as necessarily this with a negative connotation, but with a curiosity of wanting to understand and wanting to like to order in order to live in community with someone, you have to be curious about them, about their lives, their inner life, and just who they are fundamentally. And all people are fundamentally very different from one another. In disability circles, we talk a lot about how my experience of epilepsy is not the same as anyone else's experience of epilepsy. And so something that I love to do with other disabled people is we talk about our experiences of disability in various different ways. And that brings us closer to one another in understanding our overlapping needs and sometimes conflicting needs as well. And so you have to have, I think, that fundamental development of a curiosity towards other people and an understanding that people are going to be very different from you, and that's actually really good.
Yeah, I think it encourages everyone um to contribute in different ways. Again, like kind of what I was talking about with, you know, doing and being able to contribute in the ways that suit you best. And um yeah, I think that's really great. Let's see here. Sorry, my clock is dimmed, so I'm trying to see what time it is here. Okay, I think we have just a few more minutes. What time do we go to? Is it 8:30 or is it 9 or 8:45 or is it 9? Because I can keep
Good
talking,
question.
but I also don't want to keep talking for too long.
Oh, 8:30. We got 2 minutes.
Oh, so I probably shouldn't, but we do have a question. Okay, great. Let's go ahead and go to the audience question so I don't keep talking too much. Okay, so I'm just going to read this out loud for everyone. The question is, I feel like I'm intellectually out of my league here, but do you think this recent wave of oppressive, violent fascism has grown from the same kind of ignoring of the law that allows the wealthy and powerful to escape any consequences of the harms they cause?
I think that is definitely a key component. Looking at like abortion legislation, we saw that it creates almost a two-tiered citizenships where some people get to be more of a citizen than others by being able to have their rights in their body protected and being able to access specific forms of autonomy. So certainly, I think the United States has always had tiered systems of citizenship, and that this our current administration and previous administrations, as like we've talked about, who have set kind of the stage for this, have ultimately shown over and over again that there are two different types of worlds that we live in. Melinda Cooper actually has this amazing book where she delves into neoconservatism, and she states that this is just like racist politics. It's the same type of things that we saw from time immemorial with the United States. The Republicans are just reinstituting legislation and laws and systems of power that have been in place since the foundations of America. And America's always had tiered citizenships immediately from the beginning, with, for example, the practice of slavery. America has always had tiered citizenships. And so, absolutely, I think we're seeing a very visible resurgence and cementing of that tiered citizenry. So, absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I'll also say that as far as feeling intellectually out of your league here, this is how I feel with hanging out with Riley most of the time. Um, Riley and Zane are some of the most incredible and brilliant people, and I have had many moments of sitting there being like, I don't know what y'all are talking about. It sounds really smart. I guess I probably should read your book now. But no, like I think it's really important to come into this and look at it and like take your time when you're doing this. Like I said, for when I read the book, I went and like I don't know, it took me like a week of reading on and off to get through the introduction. And that's just because I wanted to try to understand it. And everything I read, I had to like read 5 times to try to piece it together and to really try to digest it and understand it. So the book is absolutely lovely. I really encourage folks to go pick it up. I know there is a link at the bottom of the webinar if you can see that. I'm assuming everyone can see that. And it is really wonderful. It is not that thick of a book. It's pretty great. I really, really have enjoyed it. I've already cited to it in some of the writings that I have done. And I really recommend folks to pick it up. Riley, thank you so much for spending this time with me and hanging out and chatting in a way that we don't normally get to.
Thank you so much. Yeah, no, this is great. And thank you so much to Charis, and thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah, okay. I think ER is going to come back on here real quick.
Yeah, thank y'all both so much for being with us. This was a great conversation. And like Allison said, you can buy The Coercive Power of Law from Charis. It really does help us when you buy event books from us. So you just click that teal button at the bottom center of the screen to buy the book. You can also buy Riley's previous books from us. We love that, appreciate it. And like I said, Be Gay Do Crime has been a bestseller for us throughout the year. Beautiful pink cover. So check that out as well if somehow that has missed you. Yeah, and we just want to encourage everyone to stay involved, stay alert, be safe and well. And if there's somebody that you wish could have watched this talk, just let them know. It'll be up on our Charis YouTube channel pretty soon. So thank y'all both, and take good care. Hope to see you in person sometime soon.
Yes. Thank you.
All right. Have a great night.
You as
You
well.
too.